The voices coming from my father's private study weren't just loud, they were desperate. I stopped halfway down the spiral staircase, my hand gripping the cold mahogany railing. I was supposed to be at the final fitting for my dress, the heavy silk creation that would mark the end of my life as Isabella Martin and the beginning of my sentence as the wife of a monster. But I had forgotten my phone, and that small lapse in memory was about to shatter whatever dignity I had left. "You can't take her," my father, Robert Martin, pleaded. His voice, usually so commanding in the boardroom of Martin Logistics, cracked with a pathetic fear. "Take Sandra. Please, Director Kang. Sandra is the one the media loves. She's beautiful. She's the one who fits your world." I froze. The air in the hallway seemed to vanish. "My sister, Sandra. The golden child. The one with the perfect smile and the modeling contract." A different voice answered. It was deep, resonating with a terrifying calmness that felt like the smooth slide of a knife against skin. "The contract states the eldest daughter, Mr. Martin. I am a man who follows the letter of the law, even when that law is written in blood." "But Isabella..." My father scrambled for words. She's the serious one. She's headstrong. She's not built to be a subservient wife to the head of the Bexa circle. She's black, she's distinct, she stands out too much. You need someone who blends into the elite circles seamlessly. Sandra is compliant. She's what you want." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My own father was trying to sell my sister to save me? No. He was trying to sell my sister to save himself from the embarrassment of marrying off his difficult daughter to a mobster. Or perhaps he thought I was so unlovable that even a criminal warlord would feel cheated. "I do not care about public perception, and I do not care about your preferences," the deep voice Kang Tae-jin replied. The sound of it sent a shiver down my spine that wasn't entirely fear. It was authority. "Isabella is the eldest. She is the payment for the 300 million won debt and the security of your shipping routes. Tomorrow, she will wear my ring. Do not test my patience, Robert. The Bexa circle does not renegotiate." I turned and ran back up the stairs, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. I made it to my room and locked the door, sliding down until I hit the floor. He didn't want me. He was taking me because of a technicality. Because I was the firstborn. I was a debt settlement. A receipt. If you enjoy powerful stories of danger, love, and unexpected twists, subscribe, like, and comment to follow Isabella's journey. The wedding ceremony was less a celebration and more a coronation of my despair. It was held at the Grand Hyatt in Seoul, overlooking the Han River, but the gray sky mirrored my internal landscape. The room was filled with the terrified elite, politicians, CEOs, and stars who knew exactly who Kang Tae-jin was behind the veneer of his legitimate construction empire. I stood at the altar, my hands trembling beneath the bouquet of white camellias. When I looked out at the crowd, I saw my sister Sandra in the front row. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked relieved. Guilt-ridden, yes, but relieved. She knew it should have been her. In the matchmaking markets of Seoul's high society, she was the prize. I was just the brainy older sister who managed the books, the one who didn't fit the mold. Then I looked at him. Kang Tae-jin was taller than I expected. He wore a black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders with military precision. His hair was swept back, revealing a sharp, angular face that was devastatingly handsome, but utterly void of warmth. His eyes were dark, like the deepest parts of the ocean where light couldn't reach. He didn't smile. He didn't even look at me with curiosity. He looked at me like I was a piece of real estate he had just acquired. "Do you, Isabella Martin, take this man?" The officiant stammered. "I do," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I do," Tae-jin said. His voice was steady, devoid of emotion. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, a massive diamond that felt heavy enough to sink a ship, his skin brushed mine. His hand was rough, calloused. The hand of a man who worked, who fought. A jolt of electricity shot up my arm, startling me. I pulled back slightly, but his grip tightened just for a fraction of a second, possessing me, before he let go. The reception was a blur of bowed heads and forced smiles. Men in dark suits, members of the Bexa Circle, flanked the perimeter of the ballroom. They watched everyone. They watched me. "He's terrifying," Sandra whispered to me when she came to hug me goodbye. She smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and fear. "Bella, are you going to be okay?" I heard rumors about his temper, about what happens to people who cross him. "I'll be fine, Sandra," I lied, straightening my spine. "It's just a business arrangement. Dad gets his routes protected, Mr. Kang gets his prestige. I'm just the collateral." "I'm so sorry," she sobbed softly. "It should have been." "Don't," I cut her off. "Just go. Be happy. Don't waste this freedom." As the night ended, I was ushered into the back of a black sedan. Tae-jin sat beside me, typing on his phone. He didn't speak to me for the entire 40-minute drive to Pyeongchang-dong, the exclusive district nestled in the mountains where the old money and the dangerous money lived in silence. The estate was a fortress. High stone walls topped with sensors, heavy iron gates that swung open silently, and guards patrolling the grounds with German shepherds. The house itself was a modern masterpiece of concrete and glass, jutting out of the mountainside, cold and imposing. Inside, it was silent. The minimalism was clinical. No photos, no personal clutter. Just gray stone, black leather, and vast empty spaces. "This is your home now," Tae-jin said, finally breaking the silence as we stood in the cavernous foyer. He handed his jacket to a waiting attendant without looking at him. "It feels like a museum," I said, my voice echoing. "Or a mausoleum." Tae-jin turned to me slowly. It was the first time he had really looked at me since the altar. His gaze swept over my face, lingering on my eyes. "It is safe. That is what matters." Safe from what? I challenged myself, my natural defiance bubbling up through my fear. "You're the most dangerous thing in Seoul, aren't you?" A muscle feathered in his jaw. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. I caught the scent of sandalwood and something metallic. "You have no idea what lies beyond these walls, Isabella. You think because you have an MBA and helped your father run a logistics company that you understand power. You understand nothing." "I understand that you wanted my sister," I snapped. The words were out before I could stop them. "I heard you with my father. I know, I'm just the clause in the contract you were forced to honor." Tae-jin's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You listen at the doors? A dangerous habit. I deserve to know why I'm here." "You're here because you're my wife," he said flatly. "Your room is the master suite. I sleep in the adjoining study. We will maintain appearances in public. In private, you stay out of my business and I will ensure you remain alive. Do we have an agreement? Do I have a choice?" "No." He turned his back on me. "Good night, Isabella." I watched him walk away, his stride long and purposeful. He didn't look back. The first week was a lesson in isolation. Tae-jin was gone before I woke up and returned long after I had gone to bed. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage. I tried to occupy myself. I reorganized the library. I swam laps in the indoor infinity pool until my muscles burned, but the silence was deafening. The staff treated me with terrified politeness. They bowed low, they called me madam, but they never met my eyes. I was an outsider. The foreign wife. The black woman in a house of Korean tradition and criminal secrets. On the 5th day, the silence was broken not by my husband, but by his mother. Madame Kang Soo-yeon arrived with the subtlety of a hurricane. She walked into the breakfast room where I was nursing a cup of coffee, flanked by 2 assistants carrying boxes. She was a tiny woman, impeccably dressed in a traditional hanbok, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "So," she said, her eyes raking over my curls, my skin, my posture. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. "This is what my son has brought into our house." I stood up, remembering my manners. "Good morning, Madame Kang. I am Isabella." I know who you are, she sniffed, walking around me like I was a horse she was considering buying. The Martin girl. The eldest. I told Tae-jin he should have insisted on the other one. The one with the... She gestured vaguely to her face. The softer look. You look hard. I am resilient, I corrected her, keeping my voice steady. There is a difference. Madame Kang stopped in front of me, her eyes sharp as flint. Resilience is necessary in this life. But beauty is what secures a legacy. You are too distinct. Too much contrast. How will you bear strong Korean sons for the Bexa circle when you are so clear? Human, I offered. Her eyes flashed. Foreign. You do not know our ways. You do not know the burden of this family. You think this is a game of dress-up. She signaled to her assistants, who dropped a pile of heavy ledgers on the table. My son says you have a mind for business. He says you are not just a decoration. Prove it. I looked at the ledgers. What is this? The household accounts. The foundation records. The legitimate face of the circle, Madame Kang hissed. If you are going to be useless as a traditional wife, perhaps you can be useful as an employee. Fix the inefficiencies. If you fail, I will personally find a way to annul this marriage, contract or no contract. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. My son needs a partner, not a burden. And right now, you are a very heavy burden. She swept out of the room, leaving me alone with the stack of documents. I stared at the papers. She thought she was punishing me? She thought she was giving me busy work? She had no idea. Numbers were the only thing that made sense to me. If they wanted me to work, I would work. I would show them exactly who they had accidentally acquired. I spent the next 3 days buried in the documents. I found discrepancies. I found money being siphoned off by a vendor in Incheon. I found tax loopholes they weren't utilizing. My mind sharpened. The fog of depression lifted. I was good at this. On the 4th night, I was working late in the library, spread out on the floor with papers surrounding me, wearing oversized sweatpants and a tank top, my hair tied up in a messy bun. I was so engrossed in a spreadsheet that I didn't hear the door open. What are you doing? I gasped and scrambled to sit up. Kang Tae-jin was standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted. His tie was undone, his top button unfastened, and there was a smear of dirt, or was it dried blood, on his white cuff. Your mother gave me the accounts, I said, clutching a file to my chest. I found some errors. He walked into the room, stepping over a pile of tax forms. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued. He crouched down in front of me, bringing his face level with mine. The intensity of his presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. Errors? He asked, his voice low. The catering company for the charity gala, I said, my voice trembling slightly. They're overcharging you by 40%. And the construction supplier in Busan is charging for steel that isn't being delivered. Someone is stealing from you, Tae-jin. He took the file from my hand. His fingers brushed mine, and again, that spark. He scanned the numbers, his eyes darting back and forth. His expression hardened. Who else has seen this? He demanded. No one. Just me. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not as a burden, not as a debt, but as something else. He reached out, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to strike me. Instead, his thumb brushed a stray curl away from my forehead. You were smarter than your father said, he murmured. He called you difficult. He didn't say you were brilliant. Being brilliant is why I'm difficult, I whispered. Perhaps, he said, standing up and towering over me. Perhaps that is exactly what I need. Get up, Isabella. Tonight, we do not sleep. You are going to explain everything you found. For the first time since the wedding, the air between us wasn't cold. It was charged. It was dangerous. And I realized with a start that I didn't want to run away. I wanted to solve the puzzle that was Kang Tae-jin. That night in the library shifted the axis of my world. We worked until the sun bled through the heavy curtains, turning the gray room a pale, dusty gold. I sat on the floor, pointing out the shell companies draining his accounts, and Kang Tae-jin sat in the leather armchair above me, listening with a focus that was unnerving. He didn't interrupt. He didn't mansplain. He simply absorbed the data, his dark eyes tracking my finger as I traced the flow of stolen money. When I finally leaned back, exhausted, rubbing my gritty eyes, he handed me a glass of water. Our fingers brushed again, but this time, neither of us pulled away immediately. "You have saved me 3 billion won in 6 hours, he said quietly. His voice was raspy from lack of sleep. "And you have identified a traitor I have trusted for 10 years. "The numbers don't lie," I whispered, looking up at him. "People do." He stared at me for a long moment, the silence thick with unspoken questions. Then he stood up abruptly, breaking the spell. "Go to sleep, Isabella. Tonight, we have a gala to attend. And I need you sharp." "A gala?" "The Bexa Foundation annual charity ball. It is time for Seoul to meet my wife properly." He paused at the door, his back to me. "Wear red. It sends a message of power. And tonight, we need to look powerful." The gala was held at the Signal Seoul, in the highest ballroom of the Latte World Tower. The city sprawled beneath us like a circuit board of light, endless and glittering. I wore the dress he had sent, a deep crimson silk that hugged every curve and pulled at my feet. It was bold. It was a declaration of war in a room full of pastels and black tuxedos. When we walked in, the conversation died. I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on us. I felt the judgment, the foreign wife, the debt payment, the mistake. But Tae-jin didn't let me falter. He placed his hand on the small of my back, a warm, heavy anchor. He didn't just guide me, he claimed me. He walked me through the crowd like I was the most valuable thing in the room, introducing me to ministers and tycoons with a cold pride that dared them to sneer. "This is my wife, Isabella," he would say. "Not Isabella Martin. Just Isabella." Like I began and ended with him. We were near the Champagne Tower when the air temperature seemed to drop. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of fear. A man approached. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and left to weather in a storm. Behind him stood a younger man, handsome in a cruel, sharp way, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Chairman Choi," Tae-jin said. His hand tightened on my waist, his fingers digging into the silk. "Director Kang," the older man, Chairman Choi Min-suk of the Choi Holdings Group, replied. His voice was like gravel. "And this must be the new acquisition." "My wife," Tae-jin corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "Isabella." The younger man, Choi Junho, stepped forward. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my neck, my chest, in a way that made my skin crawl. "Interesting choice, Tae-jin. We heard you were set to marry the Martin beauty. The model. What happened? Did you get the clearance rack version?" My blood boiled. The insult was sharp, designed to humiliate. I felt Tae-jin tense beside me, a coil of violence ready to spring. But before he could speak, I stepped forward. "The clearance rack version," I said, my voice smooth and loud enough to carry, graduated top of her class from Wharton and just restructured the Bexa Foundation's entire financial portfolio in a single night. "I prefer upgrade, Mr. Choi. But I suppose men who inherit their power rather than earn it often struggle with value assessment." The silence that followed was absolute. Choi Junho's smile vanished. Chairman Choi's eyes widened, then narrowed with a flicker of begrudging respect. Tae-jin looked down at me. For a second, I thought he would be angry that I spoke out of turn. But there was a fire in his eyes, a dark, possessive satisfaction. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. "She has a tongue," Junho sneered, recovering. "Let's hope she knows when to use it and when to bite it." "She speaks for me," Tae-jin said, his tone final. "Enjoy the evening, gentlemen. Try not to choke on the appetizers." He steered me away, moving us toward the balcony. Once we were outside in the cool night air, away from the prying eyes, he turned to face me. He pinned me against the glass railing, the wind whipping my hair around my face. "You are dangerous," he murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from my ear. I defended myself, I breathed, my heart racing. "And I defended you. You humiliated Choi Jun-ho in front of the entire Seoul elite." He pulled back to look at me, his hand coming up to cut my jaw. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending a shockwave through my body. "I should punish you for being so reckless. Are you going to?" I challenged, looking up into his dark eyes. "No." His voice was a growl. God help me, I wanted to applaud. The moment hung suspended between us. The sexual tension was no longer a spark, it was a roaring fire. He looked at me not as a contract, but as a woman. A woman he wanted. He leaned in closer, and my eyes fluttered shut, anticipating the kiss. "Director." The shout from the doorway shattered the moment. Tae-jin's head snapped up. His chief of security, a man named Han, was standing there, pale and breathless. "Sir, you need to come. Now." The drive back to the estate was done at breakneck speed. The playful, charged atmosphere of the balcony was gone, replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. Tae-jin was on the phone, speaking in rapid-fire Korean, his voice clipped and lethal. When we arrived at the house, the gates were open. Police lights flashed against the stone walls, but it was Tae-jin's private security team swarming the lawn. "Stay in the car," Tae-jin ordered, opening his door. "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "This is my home too." "What happened?" He hesitated, then ripped his arm away. "Don't look." I followed him anyway. I ran up the stone steps to the front door. The heavy oak double doors were wide open. In the center of the pristine, gray marble foyer, there was a box. A large, white gift box. It had been opened. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a traditional Korean wedding doll. The bride doll. But its wooden face had been smashed in. And wrapped around its neck was a lock of hair. Long, wavy, honey brown hair. I stopped breathing. I knew that hair. "Sandra," I choked out. Tae-jin froze. He looked at the doll, then at me. There was a note pinned to the doll's chest with a knife. "You took the wrong sister. We will correct the mistake." I fell to my knees, the red silk dress pooling around me like blood. "They have her? Do they have her?" Tae-jin was beside me in an instant, pulling me up, shielding my eyes from the sight. "Han, get her inside. Lock down the compound." "Tae-jin," I screamed, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo. "That's Sandra's hair. Is she safe? Where's my sister?" He gripped my wrists, his strength bruising. "Your family was moved to a safe house in Incheon yesterday. My men are guarding them." "Then how?" I pointed a shaking hand at the box. "They got close," Tae-jin said, his face transforming into a mask of pure, demonic rage. "They got close enough to take a trophy. This wasn't a threat, Isabella. This was a promise." He pulled me into his chest, his arms wrapping around me like iron bands. "I will burn the city down to find who did this. But you do not leave this house. Do you understand? You belong to me, and no one touches what is mine." I buried my face in his jacket, smelling the gunpowder and expensive cologne, realizing with terrifying clarity that the monster I married was now the only thing standing between me and the darkness. The compound went into full lockdown. Metal shutters descended over the floor-to-ceiling windows with a heavy, mechanical groan, sealing us inside. The aesthetic beauty of the Pyeongchang-dong estate vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a fortress preparing for a siege. I paced the length of the study, my red dress rustling like dry leaves. Tae-jin was behind his massive desk, 3 phones spread out before him, barking orders in Korean. He had discarded his tuxedo jacket, and his white shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked by a faint, jagged scar running down his left wrist. "Find the breach," he growled into the phone. The safe house was supposed to be a ghost site. If the choice found it, someone gave them the map. Find the rat, or I will start executing lieutenants until one of them confesses. He hung up and slammed the phone down, the plastic cracking under the force. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying his perfect styling. He looked wild, dangerous. And for the first time, I saw the fear beneath the rage. He was terrified of failing. Not failing the business, but failing me. Tae-jin, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I need to see the security logs for my father's company. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Isabella, stop. Go to the safe room. This is not an accounting error you can fix with a spreadsheet. The choice got close enough to Sandra to cut her hair, I snapped, walking up to the desk and placing my hands flat on the coolwood. They didn't just stumble upon her. Someone told them where she was. The safe house was arranged through Martin Logistics private transport, wasn't it? You used my father's trucks to move them so it wouldn't look suspicious. Tae-jin paused. The air in the room stilled. Yes. We used a blind transport. Then the leak isn't in your organization, I said, my mind racing faster than my fear. It's mine. It's in my father's company. Let me access the employee comms and the GPS logs. I know the patterns. I know who was on shift. He stared at me for 3 heartbeats, assessing. Then, without a word, he turned his laptop around and pushed it toward me. You have 20 minutes. Then we move. I didn't ask where. I just sat in his chair, the leather still warm from his body, and started typing. My fingers flew across the keys. I accessed the encrypted backend of Martin Logistics, a backdoor my father had installed years ago for emergency audits. I pulled the manifests for yesterday, the day my family was moved. Driver, Kim Cheol-soo. Route, Mapo to Incheon. Status, complete. I checked the GPS history. The truck had made an unscheduled stop for 7 minutes in a purely industrial sector controlled by a subsidiary of Choi Holdings. 7 minutes. Enough time to pass information. Enough time to sell a soul. But who authorized the stop? I dug deeper into the dispatch logs. The authorization code was overridden by a senior executive key. My heart stopped. I knew that code. RM, exec, 02. I found it, I whispered. The sickness rose in my throat, tasting like bile. Tae-jin was beside me instantly, one hand on the back of the chair, leaning over my shoulder. Who? It's not a driver, I said, my voice breaking. It's Director Lee, my father's COO. He's been my father's best friend for 20 years. He held me when I was a baby. Loyalty has an expiration date when the price is right, Tae-jin said coldly. He straightened up, pulling a gun from a drawer and tucking it into the holster at his back. Grab a coat. We are going to pay Director Lee a visit. I'm coming with you? I asked, standing up. You found him, Tae-jin said, his eyes dark and unyielding. You have earned the right to see justice done. And frankly, Isabella, I am not letting you out of my sight tonight. The drive was silent. We took an armored SUV, flanked by 2 other vehicles. The rain had started, lashing against the bulletproof glass, turning Seoul into a blur of neon and gray. We headed not to the glittering heights of Gangnam, but to the industrial docks of Incheon, where the shipping containers were stacked like rusty monoliths. We pulled into a warehouse owned by the Bexa Circle. The air inside smelled of salt, diesel, and old blood. In the center of the vast, empty space, a man was tied to a chair. It was Director Lee. He looked small, pathetic, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. When he saw me walking in beside the Devil of Seoul, his eyes went wide. Isabella. Bella, please. You have to understand. I stopped 10 feet away. Tae-jin stood slightly in front of me, a physical shield, but he let me speak. Understand what? I asked, my voice echoing in the cold space. That you sold my sister to a psychopath? That you cut off her hair as a warning? How much did Choi pay you, Uncle Lee? Was it worth Sandra's life? I didn't have a choice. Lee sobbed, sweat dripping down his face. Choi Junho, he has debts of mine. Gambling debts. He threatened to expose me to your father. I would have lost my pension, my reputation. So you traded my sister's safety for your reputation? I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a hardening I hadn't known I was capable of. Tae-jin stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't strike. He simply unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled his sleeves up one more turn. The silence was more terrifying than any scream. Director Lee, Tae-jin said softly, you have made a grave miscalculation. You thought the Martin family was weak. You thought I was just a business partner. You forgot that Isabella is now a Kang. Her family is my family. Please. Lee screamed. I can fix it. I know what they're planning next. Tae-jin paused. He looked back at me. I nodded. Get the information. Speak, Tae-jin commanded. They aren't going back to the safe house, Lee stammered, his words spilling out over each other. The doll, the hair. It was a distraction. To make you panic. To make you move all your security to Incheon to protect the girl. A distraction for what? I asked, stepping closer to Tae-jin. Tonight, Lee gasped. Tonight, Choi Jun-ho is hitting the shipment. The semiconductor shipment coming into Busan. The one worth $50 million. The one that guarantees the Bexa Circle's liquidity for the next year. If you lose that, the Circle defaults on its loans to the Triad. You'll be at war on two fronts. Tae-jin went still. The semiconductor shipment. It wasn't just money, it was the leverage that kept the Chinese triads from encroaching on his territory. If that shipment was seized, Tae-jin would be fighting a war he couldn't fund. And, Lee added, his voice dropping to a whisper, Robert Martin is overseeing the unloading personally. To ensure no mistakes. My blood ran cold. My father is in Busan? Yes, Lee wept. And Choi Jun-ho is already on his way there. He's going to kill him, Isabella. He's going to kill your father and frame the Bexa Circle for the hit. He wants to leave you an orphan and a widow on the same night. Tae-jin turned to me. His face was grim. Busan is 3 hours away by car. 40 minutes by chopper. Then we fly, I said, grabbing his hand. The fear was gone, burned away by a fierce, protective anger. We fly now. Tae-jin looked at his men. Secure him, he pointed at Lee. If we return, his fate depends on whether Robert Martin is alive. If my father-in-law dies, peel this man slowly. We ran back to the SUV. As we sped toward the private airfield, I looked at Tae-jin. He was already on the phone, mobilizing his Busan unit. He looked over at me, his eyes searching mine in the dark cabin. You should stay, he said. This will be a war zone. You said I'm your partner, I replied, gripping his hand so tight my knuckles turned white. My father is the target. My sister is the bait. I am not staying behind, Tae-jin. If you want a wife who sits at home and embroiders while her family is slaughtered, you married the wrong sister. He stared at me, and then, for the first time, he brought my hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles. No, he whispered against my skin. I married exactly the right one. The helicopter cut through the storm like a knife, the rotor blades screaming against the wind. Below us, the Korean peninsula was a vast expanse of darkness, punctuated only by the occasional cluster of city lights. Inside the cabin, the air was cold and smelled of aviation fuel and imminent violence. Tae-jin sat across from me, checking the magazine of a matte black pistol. The dim red light of the cabin washed over his features, carving deep shadows under his eyes. He looked like a god of war, stoic, terrifying, and beautiful. Put this on, he shouted over the noise, tossing me a Kevlar vest. I fumbled with the straps, my fingers numb. Do you really think it will come to this? Choi Jun-ho is desperate, Tae-jin said, leaning forward to tighten the straps for me. His hands lingered on my waist for a second, grounding me. Desperate men do not negotiate. They destroy. Stay behind me, Isabella. If I say run, you run. Do not argue. Do not be brave. I know the layout of the Busan port, I yelled back, locking eyes with him. My father designed the grid. Section 4 is a maze of automated cranes. If Choi is ambushing him, he'll do it at the choke point near the North Dock. That's where the blind spot is. Tae-jin paused, his hands still on the vest. He looked at me with that same intensity he had in the library, a mixture of surprise and respect. The North Dock. Yes. The cameras there have a 30-second reset delay. It's a security flaw my father never fixed because it saved money on server costs. If Choi knows about the shipment, he knows about the flaw. Tae-jin pulled a headset from the wall and handed it to me. Then you are my navigator. You guide us in. We landed on a private pad on the outskirts of the port. The rain was torrential here, coming down in sheets that blurred the world into gray static. Tae-jin's Busan security team, 6 men in tactical gear, was waiting. They didn't ask who I was. They just handed Tae-jin an assault rifle and fell into formation. The port was a city of steel. Towers of shipping containers stacked 6 high created narrow, echoing canyons. The wind howled through them, sounding like mournful ghosts. North Dock, Tae-jin commanded in his comms. Move silent. We moved through the shadows. I stayed glued to Tae-jin's back, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every creak of metal sounded like a trigger pull. Wait, I whispered, grabbing Tae-jin's wet jacket. He stopped instantly, raising a fist to halt the team. What? The crane lights, I pointed up. The massive automated cranes overhead were dark, but one in the distance, directly over the North Dock, had its warning beacon flashing. That crane is active. It shouldn't be active at night unless it's being manually overridden. They're moving the container, Tae-jin realized, his jaw tightening. They aren't just destroying the shipment, they're stealing it. And my father? If he's useful, he's alive. If the container is moving, he's no longer useful. Panic flared in my chest, hot and blinding. We have to hurry. No, Tae-jin said, his voice deadly calm. We have to be smart. Can you access the crane controls from the ground? I can try. There's a maintenance terminal at the base of Tower 4. Go, he ordered, pointing to a shadowed structure 50 yards away. 2 of my men will cover you. Lock that crane down. I will draw their fire. Tae-jin, no. Go. He didn't wait for me to argue. He broke cover, sprinting toward the North Dock, his rifle raised. Gunfire erupted instantly, the crack, 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 echoing off the metal containers. I ran. I ran through the rain, slipping on the wet asphalt, the 2 guards flanking me. Bullets sparked against the steel container to my left, sending shards of metal flying. I didn't stop. I reached the maintenance tower and smashed the glass cover of the control panel with my elbow. Come on, I muttered, typing in the override codes my father had taught me years ago during a summer internship I hated. Martinlog_admin. Access granted. On the screen, I saw the feed from the crane's camera. The scene below was a nightmare. My father was on his knees in the pouring rain, his hands zip-tied behind his back. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, the blood mixing with the rainwater running down his face. Standing over him was Choi Junho, holding a pistol to my father's head. He was laughing. Surrounding them were a dozen of Choi's men, loading crates from the Bexa Circle's container into their own trucks. Drop the load. I screamed at the screen, hammering the command to freeze the crane. With a groan of hydraulic protest, the massive crane overhead stopped dead. The container it was lifting swung wildly, crashing into a stack of crates with a deafening boom. The distraction worked. Choi Junho flinched, looking up. That was the second Tae-jin needed. He emerged from the shadows like a wraith. He took out 2 guards before they even turned around. The chaos was instantaneous. The port turned into a war zone. Muzzle flashes illuminated the rain like strobe lights. Cover fire. I heard Tae-jin roar over the comms. I watched on the screen, helpless, as Tae-jin fought his way toward my father. He moved with a terrifying grace, efficient and brutal. But there were too many of them. Isabella. Tae-jin's voice crackled in my ear. Kill the lights. Now. I scrambled to find the lighting grid controls. Floodlights. Sector 4. I hit disable. The North Dock plunged into absolute darkness. I couldn't see anything on the screen anymore. I could only hear the screams and the gunfire. I waited, counting the seconds, my breath hitched in my throat. 1, 2, 3. Then, a single gunshot rang out, louder than the rest. Final. Silence followed. Tae-jin. I whispered into the headset. Tae-jin. Static. Dad. Nothing. I couldn't stay in the tower. I abandoned the console and ran back out into the rain, ignoring the guards shouting at me to stop. I sprinted toward the North Dock, my boots splashing in puddles that looked black like oil. Tae-jin. I screamed, skidding around the corner of a container. The emergency lights flickered back on a failsafe I hadn't accounted for. The scene was illuminated in a sickly yellow glow. My father was alive. He was lying on the ground, gasping for air, the zip ties cut. But Tae-jin. Tae-jin was standing over Choi Junho's body. Choi was down, clutching his leg, screaming. But Tae-jin wasn't moving to finish him. Tae-jin was swaying. He turned to look at me, and my heart shattered. His white shirt was soaked red. Not with Choi's blood. With his own. He pressed a hand to his side, blood dark and thick seeping between his fingers. Isabella, he choked out, his knees buckling. No! I shrieked, sprinting the final distance. I slid to the ground just as he collapsed, catching his head in my lap. No, no, no. Tae-jin, look at me. His skin was clammy, the rain washing away the blood as fast as it pumped out. He looked up at me, his eyes losing focus. He reached up, his bloody hand staining my cheek. I told you. He whispered, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. I would burn the world to keep you safe. Don't you dare, I sobbed, pressing my hands over his wound, feeling the hot pulse of his life slipping away. Don't you dare leave me here with them. You promised. You said we were partners. The shipment. He wheezed, his eyes drifting to my father. Is safe. I don't care about the shipment. I screamed, tears blinding me. I care about you. His hand dropped from my face. His eyes fluttered shut. Tae-jin. Behind me, sirens began to wail in the distance. The police. Or more of Choi's men. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the man dying in my arms. The man I had been forced to marry. The man I had learned to respect. The man I had realized too late that I loved. The waiting room of the Asen Medical Center was a sterile purgatory. I sat in a plastic chair, my red silk dress ruined, stiff with dried blood, Tae-jin's blood. I refused to change. I refused to wash it off until I knew he was breathing. My father, Robert, sat across from me, his head bandaged, his arm in a sling. He looked aged, diminished. He kept trying to catch my eye, to apologize, but I couldn't look at him. Not yet. All my energy was focused on the double doors where a team of surgeons was trying to stitch the pieces of my husband back together. Madam Kang is here, Security Chief Han whispered, stepping to my side. I stood up as the doors opened. Madam Kang Soo-yeon walked in. She didn't look like a grieving mother. She looked like a general inspecting the front lines. She saw my father and ignored him completely. She walked straight to me. Her eyes scanned my blood-soaked dress, my messy hair, the bruises on my arms. For the first time, there was no judgment in her gaze. There was recognition. Is he alive? She asked, her voice steel. He's in surgery, I said, my voice raspy. The bullet missed the heart, but hit the lung. He lost a lot of blood. Madam Kang nodded slowly. She reached out and touched the dried blood on my sleeve. You did not run. No, I said, lifting my chin. I didn't. Good, she whispered. The Queen of the Bexa Circle does not run. We waited for 6 hours. When the surgeon finally emerged, looking exhausted, the air in the room seemed to vibrate. He is stable, the doctor said. It was close. But Director Kang is remarkably stubborn. My knees finally gave out. Han caught me before I hit the floor. I didn't leave his bedside for 3 days. I slept in the chair, waking at every beep of the monitor. During the quiet hours, I worked. I had Han bring me my laptop. While Tae-jin fought to heal, I fought the war he had started. I accessed the financial data I had pulled from the Choi Holdings server before the port attack. I didn't just want them arrested. I wanted them erased. I sent anonymous tips to the tax service. I leaked evidence of their bribery to the press. I froze their overseas assets. By the time the sun rose on the third day, the Choi Empire was nothing but a smoking crater of debt and scandal. "You are ruthless," a rough voice rasped. I froze. I looked at the bed. Tae-jin's eyes were open. They were hazy with pain medication, but they were focused on me. "Tae-jin," I breathed, dropping the laptop and rushing to the side of the bed. I took his hand, careful of the 4 lines. "You're awake." "I watched you," he whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "For the last hour. You type like you were stabbing someone." "I was finishing what we started," I said, tears pricking my eyes. "The Choi's are gone. Chairman Choi is in custody. Junho is gone. My father is safe. Sandra is safe. And you?" he asked, his thumb weakly brushing my palm. "Are you safe?" "I'm here," I said, leaning down to rest my forehead against his shoulder. "I'm right here." He was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rhythm of his own heart monitor. "I lied to you, Isabella." I pulled back, confused. "About what?" "The contract," he murmured. "When your father offered the deal, I had a choice. He offered Sandra first. He showed me her portfolio, her modeling photos. She was beautiful, yes. Compliant." My chest tightened. "I know. You wanted her." "No," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. "Then he showed me a photo of you. It was from a business conference. You were arguing with a man twice your age. You looked fierce, intelligent, unbreakable. I told your father I would take the eldest daughter not because of tradition, Isabella, but because I knew the beauty would bore me in a week. But the warrior? The warrior would stand by me when the world burned." Tears spilled over my cheeks. "You chose me?" "I always chose you," he whispered. "I just needed you to choose me back." "I do," I sobbed, kissing his forehead, his cheek, his lips. "I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us." 6 months later. The garden of the Pyeongchangdong estate was in full bloom. The cherry blossoms were falling like pink snow. It was a stark contrast to the gray, cold fortress I had first entered. We stood on the wooden pavilion, just Tae-jin and me. No press, no politicians, no business associates. Just Madame Kang watching from the porch with a rare smile, and my sister Sandra, who was holding a glass of champagne and looking genuinely happy for the first time in years. My father was there too, standing quietly in the back, respectful of the boundaries we had drawn. Tae-jin looked devastating in a dark navy suit. He had healed, though he moved with a slight stiffness on rainy days, a permanent reminder of the night in Busan. "Do you have the rings?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "I do," I said, pulling 2 simple platinum bands from my pocket. We had discarded the massive diamonds from the first wedding. Those were for the show. These were for us. Kang Tae-jin," he said, taking my hand, "take you, Isabella Martin, not as a debt payment, not as an alliance, but as my equal. My partner. My life." "Isabella Martin," I replied, sliding the band onto his finger, "take you, Kang Tae-jin, not as my captor, but as my protector. My heart. My choice." He kissed me then, deep and slow, and for the first time, I didn't taste fear. I tasted victory. As we pulled apart, looking out over the city that we now ruled together, legitimate and otherwise, I realized that the story I had thought I was living, the tragedy of the wrong sister, was a lie. I wasn't the wrong sister. I was the only sister who could have survived him. I was the only one who could have loved him. Tae-jin wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Ready to go back to work, Director Kang?" he teased, using the title I had officially taken within the Foundation. I smiled, resting my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Always, I said. The Korean Mafia boss might have asked for my sister, but he married me. And in the end, it was the best deal he ever made. If you enjoyed this story of danger, passion, and justice, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us what you would have done in Isabella's shoes.